A rise in measles cases worldwide as Canada's top doctor calling on Canadians to check their immunization records before heading out on March break. Here's travel expert Claire Newell, who joins us now for more on this and some other travel headlines. Claire, good morning. And the rise in measles is reportedly due to a decline in vaccinations. So what exactly is Health Canada recommending?
Well, Dr. Theresa Tam is concerned because we have so many kids that are heading off on spring break in the coming weeks. And there is this global spike in cases of measles, which nobody wants. And there are this pool of school-age kids that didn't get vaccinated during COVID. And so when they go on vacations into areas that has measles and they import it back into Canada, we're going to have community spread, which nobody wants either. And so she is imploring people to take a look at their immunization records. Now, for those who might not remember, when you're little, between age 12 months and 15 months, you typically get the MMR, the measles, mumps, rubella, and then you get a second dose just before you start school. But if there's any adults out there, mine were paper copies of records and don't know if they've had the second shot or even the first, you can get a booster. And it can be effective even just within days. So if you don't have it, you might want to, because the cases of measles can be really nasty. You showed some pictures before the break. It's awful.
For sure. All right. To that other big story we were talking about earlier in the show, Claire, Lynx Air officially ceasing operation on Monday. What is the latest when it comes to passengers who have been left stranded?
Yeah, anytime I see an airline go under and cease operation with just little to no notice, and in this case, it was just about 48 hours worth of flying, it leaves people stranded and they're ending up having to deal with it. And not only is it expensive, some people having to pay 2 or 3 times what they paid in comparison to the Lynx ticket. They may have to stay longer, days longer than they had anticipated, and have all these expenses for hotels and food and you name it. So there were the airlines here in Canada that did come up with some discounts. WestJet still is valid. It's valid up until tomorrow. So if you need to get back on the routes that were serviced previously by Lynx, you may be able to get a better rate. But there's 3 things that I implore everyone to do. The first is, if you have an unused ticket, make sure that you talk to your credit card company and start a claim. If you've got any insurance that covers you for cancellation and interruption, start a claim as well. And if you have a trip that you now can't use the ticket for, get yourself booked as soon as possible. It'll give you the most availability and probably the lowest rates.
All right. Meantime, Claire, Lynx joins Lynx Air, Swoop, CanJet in folding. Why have so many of Canada's so-called discount carriers, why have they failed to take off?
Yeah, this is a tough one. And you're right. There's a whole host of airlines that have hit the Canadian airline graveyard, unfortunately, over the years. And I've seen many of them. And there are lots of factors that may play into why an airline may fail. But there are 3 things that are never going to go away here in this country. The first is that we have 2 major carriers, Air Canada and WestJet, that if there is a startup airline and they pick a city pair that they want to fly between, one of these big carriers can come into play. And regardless of what the fare goes to, and these really, really cheap fares, they'll match it because they've got deeper pockets. The other thing is that it's expensive to actually run an airline here in Canada. The fees for the airports and things are very, very expensive. And the one real main factor is that we have this huge country that's sparsely populated. And because of that, you can't do what you see in Europe, where there's city pairs and maybe under service, an airline wants to go into them and they end up doing it. But the flight's only maybe an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours. We don't have that here in Canada.
But with fewer airlines and fewer discount carriers, isn't this less competition, meaning higher prices in the end?
So it does mean that there's less competition, but since COVID, we've had a lot of carriers come into the marketplace here in Canada. In addition to Air Canada and WestJet, we've seen plays by Claire Airlines, Porter Airlines, Canada Jetlines, which weren't really in play prior to the pandemic. So there is still choice. Claire operates in that ultra low cost carrier space. Yes, we're going to see higher prices, but in general, it's been a lot cheaper than it's been to fly here, especially domestically within Canada.
All right. Well, speaking of airfares, last we spoke, Claire, we were talking about how they are actually going down. Airline fees are declining. That was helping to reduce overall inflation. But now there's some growing concern over so-called flight fees. We're seeing increases in things such as baggage charges and actually using your credit card to book your trip.
Right. So, yeah, we did speak about this last week, and that Stats Canada come out with the fact that this January, the fares are about 14.3% cheaper than they were last January, which is great news. But that's for the base fare of an airline cost. So what we're seeing the spike in fees is for ancillary fees, those extras, the services that you may want. And for many people, they want early boarding. They want their seat selection. They want to eat on board. They want to pay with their credit card. So all of those fees, we're starting to see those creep up. And this isn't something that's a surprise to me. We saw this start in Europe. It's just happened in the U.S. with baggage fees. American Airlines and Alaska within the last few months have increased their fees. WestJet has now increased their fees by about $5 for a checked-in bag. If you're still doing carry-on, you don't have fees. Air Canada has not yet, but I would anticipate that they will. And you mentioned credit card fees. So we see this in the retail space where someone may charge you if you choose to pay by credit card. And now Flair Airlines is starting to do that. So if you are choosing to pay by credit card on Flair, you will have another fee.
All right. We're going to have to leave it there for now. Claire, thank you for this update.
Yeah, my pleasure.